And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm here with Pam Smith. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today because I lost out on my childhood, if you will, only because I have no memory of anything before the age of 18. And I get a lot of parents asking me questions about how to help their children. And I have no sense of how to help them. So having this conversation today, I'm so excited to sort of get that idea and help parents, because that's the number one thing, right? And I would like to start a conversation with why it's important for early intervention as soon as you find out your child might be on the spectrum.
Absolutely. So I think more than anything, and let me just start by saying, I'm a behavior and education consultant. I have, I guess we're coming up on 30 years of experience in the field, but I come at this from actually an education background. So I have sort of a teacher mindset of trying to accomplish goals and trying to break things down so that people can understand. So a lot of trying to think about what the skill is and break it down, so meeting where the person is and build up to the skill to accomplish the goal. And so when I think about early intervention, or what a parent might be wanting to look for, what I'm really thinking about a lot is understanding their child. So understanding where their child is coming from, what helps and doesn't help their child. And yes, there's this umbrella of there's autistic characteristics, and those things are certainly defined in a variety of ways. But the DSM-4, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, or 5, is one of those spaces. But more so than anything, I think that what is helpful to parents is to have information and have a team of people that are understanding and seeing their child for who they are, and helping them to slow down and be maybe not necessarily as worried about various milestones or various, I kind of consider it keeping up with the Joneses, that old phrase, not necessarily, oh, he's 3 and he should be doing XYZ, or she's 8 and she's not, fill in the blank, whatever those things are, and more, this is who my child is. And in order for them to be a successful person in our family and in the community and in life long term, there are some things that we might need to approach slightly differently in order to teach them. We might need to understand that sleep for them is a different beast than for our other kids. Or eating, going to a restaurant is just not something our family can do. Going to a family event is something that is going to look different for our family than it is for somebody else's family. And rather than necessarily having the autism diagnosis per se and early intervention, both of those pieces, of course, there's a lot of research about early intervention leading to better outcomes. I put in finger quotes better, only the sense of what are we measuring, how are we measuring it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think these are sweeping trends. And so I think one way to think about that is having an attention to what your child needs, or a way of teaching and interacting with your child, leads to better outcomes. I think that every human being who's a parent could probably agree that, yes, when I understood that my child was meaning X, Y, or Z, or needing something from me, then we had better outcomes as a family. And so, but in addition to that, obviously a specific medical diagnosis or a specific educational diagnosis does open doors for various services. And so there are some dueling realities that it might not always be necessary that you have a specific diagnosis, or that there's a perfect line between what you're presented with your human beings and what the diagnostic criteria are. And what is also true is that we live in a system and we live in a society that has these systems that there's these check marks that we have to go through. And so both things are true. And so that's a long start.
No, and I appreciate that, because one of the things that I have found over the years as somebody who's autistic, and I have to repeat this at least once a week, if you've met one person on the autism spectrum, you've met exactly one person on the autism spectrum. And so trying to find what's right for your child is a very individualized experience. And it's really all about, like you were saying, most important piece is getting to know your child.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recommend parents sort of start that process?
So a lot of this, often depending on the age of the child, it really, like the entry point is often some version of speech, some version of communication. It might also be some of the other kinds of common things that we might hear are also co-occurring. Maybe some digestive challenges, maybe sleep challenges, as I alluded to before, maybe some picky eating or some behavioral characteristics that are maybe more, I'm going to use the word static, more kind of linear or, lining things up. That's a pretty common one when you just Google autism, diagnoses, some of these generalities come up. And so there is something to be said for, your child. And sometimes people have had other children who are non-autistic, and that can be an illuminating experience of like, every child is different as well, just as, as we know. And parenting maybe a girl versus a boy, or, I want to be respectful of a child assigned girl or boy at birth. But the whole concept is there's also a layer of understanding what your family needs and what your sort of family values are and what is important to the culture that is your family and what that looks like. And so an example might be, if food is something that's really important to your family, maybe you're a chef, or maybe, your grandparents have always passed down tons of cookbooks, and you have Sunday dinner always together, and now you have a person who's coming into the family system and is anti-food. It might be something to sort of say, okay, let's take a look at, we have this thing that's really important to us, and we have someone who's not able to enter into what's very important to us. And I bring up this example not to say this is a way to get a diagnosis or anything like that, but just to say why we might start to see some things, even if they're not speech, and they're not really obvious speech, or they're not really obvious with the ones he's not answering to his name, or she's not giving me eye contact, some of those ones that are, but there's more of these bigger picture things of, am I able to impart our family values, or are we not kind of communicating in the same way to be able to impart and have those values be something we can grow? And if that's the case, then it's sort of like, oh, okay, maybe I need an outside set of eyes to help me bridge that gap.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I do remember from childhood, my dad's a saint. We had the same thing for dinner every night, and it changed every night, but it was the same all 7 days. Like Monday was always shake and bake chicken, always this. Tuesdays was always chicken Alfredo, and we got ourselves into a routine. Mm-hmm. And I know that. So when you're saying the family dynamic and a chef, how do you sort of break that, or do you break that?
Well, I don't know that you necessarily need to break it. I think it's more, again, understanding that if you're over here and this is your family value and your child is having a hard time over here, it's understanding how to lead, to either, maybe it's getting more information and presenting it to your child in a different way, or maybe it's changing your value system. It doesn't really matter. There's not one right answer, just like there's not going to be one right family system. But my sense is that the idea would be that the first time that you kind of have that intersection of, oh, I had this expectation about parenting, and I think everybody understands. You come into parenting with a lot of expectations, and then your child is who your child is. There's that on a universal level.
Yeah.
And then and then some, if you have an autistic child or a child who struggles with neurodiversity in general, and whether or not your own family, your own neurodiversity might be coming into play, and how those things come together. And I think all I was getting at with the example of the family values is to think in terms of, I've known some families where verbal communication, or I've known some kids where verbal communication didn't come about for quite some time. I know someone who started speaking when he was about 10. I know someone else who was about 5. Yeah. And and those are just anecdotal. There's plenty of folks out there. There's obviously tons of non-speaking, autistic, extremely, communicative but non-speaking people. But if for whatever reason speaking is this extremely important thing, then there's the potential for there's to be kind of conflict or friction.
Okay.
And so the idea would be, do you, is that the sort of horse you want to, what is that, the hill you want to die on? Or do you want to know who your child is and help them have the most regulating experience in life and the most the most connection that you can have? I don't know. There's not a right answer, but these are some of the things that I would look at if I was supporting someone who's young or new or starting to have questions about some of these things. Sometimes a diagnosis and really kind of drilling down on those answers is extremely important and valuable. And sometimes it doesn't matter. Okay. And there's everything in between. In fact, I recently just at a barbecue, someone said, yeah, I kind of thought about maybe talking to you about, autistic for my child. And I said, well, okay, I know this person, I think they're 9, they're going to be 10 soon. And I said, okay, well, let's think about what does the diagnosis buy you? Yeah. Your family is valuing neurodiversity, valuing how this person enters situations. They're pretty reticent, not a lot of talking, absolutely, understands and, brilliant reader and highly verbal, but not socially very verbal. Okay, but your family has figured out how to do that and be, involved in a barbecue so I guess and I said, and the reality is that if you needed funding for something, this is the door that's the key that opens the door that gets you some of these things. And so it's really kind of the balance, and it's going to be really individualized based on each family.
And that's interesting because that's kind of the same advice I give adults, whether or not they get a diagnosis or not. It really depends on your expected outcomes and if it's going to benefit you or not. And in my circle, self-diagnosis is valid. We welcome everybody. If you say you're autistic, welcome to the club. And so at the same time, though, some people, like myself included, I really needed that validation because I had suspicions, and even though I thought I was 99.9% sure I was autistic and explained everything that sort of happened over my life, I still wanted that piece of paper to validate my existence. Absolutely. And I can get both sides for parents too. Mm-hmm. Now, how hard is it to go through that process to get a diagnosis for a child?
It unfortunately, right now there are quite long waiting lists, mm-hmm. and I'm not a diagnostician, but certainly I usually work with folks. Sometimes I'm with folks before, mm-hmm. but usually I've heard about their journey after I kind of come in post diagnosis most of the time. That said, there's long waiting lists. There's a lot of spaces to do this, and it is unfortunately because for a child, because the services are so linked through your medical insurance or your school, it is beneficial sometimes to have the actual label of what it is we're talking about. And depending on what the presentation of kind of, I'll just call them challenges. If the family is seeing the way the person is presenting as challenging, depending on what those are, there's all kinds of, very beneficial interactions to have with professionals, even with medications, et cetera, et cetera. And so the door being open is really helpful. Back to my kind of barbecue example, they're not really experiencing that. They're not really experiencing any doors that need to be opened in order for life to be different for them. And that's kind of the balancing act that family in particular, that's the conversation we were having. And maybe in 2 years, they'll have changed their mind. In 8 years, they'll have changed. I don't know. Maybe that is a person we'll encounter when they're an adult. But for right now, for where their family is, they're leaning towards, I don't know if this is necessary. And what is also true is there are some folks who it's such a, they are clamoring for and seeing DSP on your shirt. DSPs, to support for the family, for the family to be able to watch the sibling soccer game. They need another adult in place, or for, grandma and grandpa to understand, we're not going to be able to come to every family dinner. You need to understand, and this is why. There's a lot of, and everything in between, right? There's a lot of, and people just like you who just want to know what is the answer here. And it does make a lot of sense for a lot of people to do that. What is the process is, it is a diagnostic that will be administered by usually a psychologist. Sometimes there's just clinicians that can do it as well, especially at the school level. But almost always a psychologist will be signing off on it at some level, and there'll be a report. There are different diagnostic criteria, as you know. The behavior, then it's a behavioral diagnosis, so they're looking at what they see from the other person. It's not it's not like a self. I mean, they would certainly be interviewing, and you probably remember from your own diagnosis.
Oh yeah. I appreciate that distinction, because if you're talking about the difference between a behavioral analysis and a mental health analysis, it's completely different.
Right.
Oh, interesting. I hadn't put those together until just now.
Yeah.
So please continue.
Yeah. So it's going to be looking for specific things, and this is one of those things that kind of historically has impacted, in particular, people assigned female at birth getting an autism diagnosis, is it doesn't look exactly the same sometimes. And so if the diagnostic criteria are sort of looking at prototypical male assigned at birth outcomes, then like I talked about, lining up trains or not having words or not making eye contact, those are some, again, sweeping generalizations, but that's often why, more kind of later diagnosis, female assigned at birth, or any that kind of lane of things, it's getting way better. But I've been around long enough to know, my practice was 98% male identifying back in the day, and is totally 50-50 now.
Oh, interesting. And has that shift sort of over time, or have you seen that sort of the last decade, or?
I would say probably the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years. Kind of depends on where you're located in the United States and in the world, different folks. And that's, an interesting thing to kind of consider is, again, this one set of behaviors and how that works. Does that work for you? Maybe it works in your family that things are all lined up, because that's really helpful, because nobody else lines things up and this person makes things neat. Some of it is why have we created some of these things as being problematic? And what is also true is this might be a person who's having a hard time connecting with other people, or accessing their education, or being a part of the community, or, like I said, going to family dinner and feeling connected there. So it's kind of the dance between these things. And I'm by no means suggesting that there's one right answer at all. And really, just kind of peeling back the onion.
Yeah, and I appreciate it so much, because it's one of those things everybody talks about autism in that stereotypical way. And so just having a frank conversation. For example, I have a friend who has a non-speaking autistic child. And there was conflict between a doctor and a speech pathologist as to whether or not sign language was appropriate, because this was a child that didn't have any other way to communicate up until that point. I mean, do you find it's better to sort of give children the opportunity to have any way to communicate, to sort of fill in the gaps, as opposed to sort of waiting until it sort of develops on its own?
So I guess I would put it to you differently. If you didn't have a voice, wouldn't you be grateful for having some way to communicate?
Oh yeah, I would jump at the chance. Yeah.
Having any kind of way of getting your needs met, especially, and feeling connected to other people.
Yeah.
Language is an interesting construct that, we've basically decided that we're going to call this microphone, and we're going to have that set of phonemes mean this object right here. But you and I can both look at this object and look at one another and agree, we both see the same thing, and have it not have any kind of letters, sounds, or anything to it, and we still have agreement. We still have communication. And so what's interesting is I don't know who was on which side, but I think that there's no benefit whatsoever to preventing a small person from not expressing themselves in some way, even if it's a big emotion, right?
Yeah.
Like you get to have your big emotions. You get to also be safe, and you don't get to hit your sister,
Right.
and you don't get to pull the dog's tail or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you can have your big feelings, and so I'm going to help shape how that can be safe. But not having any means of expression feels
short-sighted,
cruel.
Yeah.
I'm going to go as far as to say cruel.
And I really appreciate that, because that's exactly kind of what I gave my friends advice to. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad you validated that for me, because I think it's a huge thing. Like, give your child any means possible to start communicating, because the rest will follow.
And I will say that in my experience, in my 30 years, I have never, ever experienced a person who felt heard and seen, who then was like, and now I'm going to actively not talk to you because I know how to talk. I'm going to actively choose not to talk to you because I'm doing sign language instead. And that's not the way it is. Yeah. Everyone's going to do the very best they can. And if that means that my vocal cords are working and my auditory processing is working so that I can formulate the sounds, great. Now we are going to be doing it the same way. But if that means I'm pointing and I'm going, and I'm tugging your hand, that's still valid. It's
100%.
It still has meaning. It still makes our lives connected. And that's the whole point of life.
Yeah. And the unintended consequence for my friend, too, was that the minute they introduced sign language, some words followed, where before there were no words. And the idea that just to see the growth in that child and be able to communicate and participate, it's a game changer.
Absolutely.
And so what are some of the things that parents should look out for in their children? Like you said, lining up the toys and things like that. Like I remember I used to work with children who were on the spectrum. And that was pretty consistent. We even had some kids that had to do certain things in every single visitation room all the way around every single time before they could do all that stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So routines, obviously, like rigid beyond sort of feasible routines can be an indication, and not beyond feasible. That's not probably the proper. But sort of problematically routine, where I always sit at this point, I always sit in this place, and now someone's in my chair and I'm going to hit them or push them in order to get them off because I need to be there. That's, I think we could probably all agree, is like a big reaction to what I understand why that person feels it's very important to them, and they probably could gain skills to not have that be their outcome. Yeah. And therefore, that's an example where kind of rigidity that's kind of bumping up into other people's stuff. We all have routines. We all have rigid things. We all, I'm a stickler for taking my shoes off when I walk inside the door, and I'm going to be noticing that every time. And I also know how to be flexible. And so it's the dance between these two things. If you're really having a child who's having a hard time doing the dance between routine and sometimes the routine isn't exactly the same, that might be an indicator. A big one, that gets lots of lip service is eye contact. Well, eye contact is extremely cultural dependent. And so what I would have people consider is less eye contact, less like my eyes are meeting your eyes, and more the concept of emotion sharing. And this is not my idea. I'm getting this from Dr. Stephen Gutzstein of Relationship Development Intervention and all his research prior to that. But what his research and lots of other people's, but really using face gaze for emotion sharing is something that when it's missing, you're missing a second layer of communication. So there could be words coming back and forth, but right now you're giving me eye contact every once in a while, which is I'm only going to use it as an example. Yeah. But so we're episodically giving one another eye contact. I'm looking at you as I'm talking to make sure that you're nodding, to make sure that I'm not confusing you, yeah. Right? You're looking at me probably to gain extra information, and then you're also thinking, so you're looking off, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking at some toys over in this corner, right? And because I'm gathering my thoughts, because looking at you constantly would be extremely weird.
Yeah.
and doesn't help move our stuff forward. But checking in with you does, and that's kind of, we're sharing the emotion of our conversation. A very young child will seek out faces of anyone in order to share their experience. And that's where pointing comes in. Hey, look, did you see there's that dog? Or, or in contrast, it would be, looking at dog, 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 but not finding a person to share it with.
Oh, that's me. That's so interesting. And so like I remember, like I didn't know people communicated anything with their eyes until I was 40 years old. I was missing so many. I didn't even know what an eye roll was, or like expression and all that. So like I've had some sort of face blindness and emotional face blindness for like my entire life. And it's interesting that you said that. One of my favorite memories of an autism support group, we were all together and we were heavy into conversation, and out of nowhere, a bug landed on the table and we all stopped talking and we just stared intently at the bug for like about a minute. And then we all sort of remembered we were all in the same room. We just picked up right where we left off.
That's
And
so
I was
funny.
like, it was such a cool experience because
That is.
collectively we were like,
Yeah, your attention shifted to this object.
Yeah.
And you all had the same experience of like, I'm gonna study this object, which is fair and totally. And what is sort of, what would have happened with a different set of people is maybe one person would have noticed, or one person would have shooted away and stayed, having the eye contact or having the language to keep talking. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer for other things, but in terms of the entree into what should we be looking for, a big one for me, if I'm seeing, if I see a baby in line at Fred Meyer or something, I'm always like, ooh, ooh. And if that baby is like, oh, you're interesting and new and making faces at me, I'm like, okay, they're probably fine,
Yeah.
And if the baby's like, uh-oh, danger, and then they look to their parent, I'm like, oh, that baby's probably fine because that they're looking for reassurance from the parent. But if that baby is sort of like, ooh, I'm going to be just staying interested in my strap or like my finger, it's this is like one little tiny anecdotal thing. I'm not trying to scare anybody.
Oh, 100%.
But that would be something where I'd go, I want to explore this further. Maybe it's just that kid is tired that day. Maybe that kid had a long day. Maybe that kid just got their vaccinations. Who knows what's going on with that kid? But if over time I really saw, if I had, a baby, I've had, I have nieces and nephews. I've known other babies from, my friends' kids and things of that nature. And there are some little things that I look for. Are they sharing with their parent? Are they seeking their parent for comfort? Like if they fall and tumble off their tricycle or something like that.
Yeah.
You'll, ouch, ouch, ouch. And they might look at their knee. But then if they look to find anyone like, look at my knee, look at what's happened to me, that is a really big indicator of like, oh, they're finding a connection with another person. They're taking on the responsibility of sharing. But if they're just staying focused on knee, oh, ouch, 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 that's more internal, and they don't really realize they have that opportunity to connect with someone else.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's interesting. And then, so let's say, for example, that you have these indicators, you're starting to sort of come up with an idea. Who should they talk to first?
Yeah, in most places, you do have to go through your pediatrician first. And pediatricians, depending on the pediatrician, will potentially, and depending on the child and the family, they will potentially have some, stopgaps that they will have in place, and sort of say, oh, well, let's give it 6 months. Or they might say, okay, we'll start, but then the waiting list is 6 months. There's a lot potential that, people should just be aware, much like many things in the health system, it's extremely hurdlesome.
Yeah.
One space that is sometimes more amenable is actually public schools. Everybody, do you talk much about school at all?
A little bit. I know, I know there's a huge difference between a medical diagnosis and a school diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, I don't know because I understand like the school diagnosis helps you with schooling, but it doesn't really help you outside of that environment, right?
Correct. And there's some work being done in Oregon, and I'm not sure what the status of it, but there's some work being done actually by the Autism Society of Oregon and some other entities that are trying to get Oregon to recognize both, in order to kind of shore that up. However, if we just start talking about them being separate, you're 100% right that the educational diagnosis doesn't impact medical and medical doesn't impact educational. They can help one another, but they don't automatically. But what's interesting is that from, certainly from age 5, from kindergarten, everyone is available to have a free education and, public education in the state of Oregon, right? Prior to 5, that you might be eligible for early intervention. And so having, just exploring like, hey, would my kid qualify through early intervention in your county? It's usually kind of through the county, but it's through your school district as well. They can do some early diagnostics. And there's some people that might enter that system and kind of grow out of it and not end up needing other intervention. That's relatively common. There's some folks that are sort of, that starts and then it's like, yep, this is autism. We're going to, have a lot of supports that look like this. So sometimes the schools can be a slightly faster lane to get in to get actual supports and get some answers. But you don't necessarily, you definitely don't have medical support, obviously, from that, as we've mentioned a few times. But also, there can be more turnaround in a school district. There can be a little bit less experience depending on the school district you're in. So understanding the wide breadth of what could be presented to you. It might be the case that you get a psychologist who's seasoned and understands a lot of different things, and you might get someone who's right out of school and doesn't know anything. And that could happen in a medical situation as well. Medical situation as well. However, it's potentially a little bit more likely at a school district level that you just might not have as much experience coming to the table. Not always, but sometimes. And so they would do some of the same tests. There's often a parent interview process, like does your child do X, Y, Z, and they would have another trusted adult, and so there'd be a parent perspective, and then there'd be another trusted adult that so maybe it's, depending on the age of the child. So like I recently did that for someone who's re-entering after being homeschooled, and I did a survey as their tutor. So I'm their tutor, and they, I'm checking off my little boxes, and that will serve to support his qualifying for entering the public schools. So schools, sometimes could be a little bit of a faster entry to getting some answers and getting some supports. And many schools have speech and language available to their students. Many schools have occupational therapy. Sometimes they have physical therapy. Sometimes they have adapted PE. Certainly they might have special education service. They have to have special education services. Right. And so a variety of curriculum support. And really, I think one of the things to kind of remember is just because you're entering special ed doesn't mean you're stuck in there forever. It doesn't mean that you're not cognitively capable. It means you are getting an education that's tailored to your needs. And that's really all it boils down to. It's an individualized education plan. It's for the individual based on their needs, based on their present levels. And so that could be something that they stay in services. And sometimes, they're like, see, I'm going to be like everybody else.
And I see both sides. So let's say that, so now we've got to that point where the diagnosis and you're starting that sort of behavioral intervention. One of the things that they throw out there a lot is the ABA therapy. And I think there's a lot of misnomers about what that is today versus what it was 20 years ago. And the one consistent theme that I do know that I highly encourage people when they're looking at behavioral is positive reinforcement as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah,
absolutely. Why is that so important?
Well, if we just think about it in very broad strokes, um, behavior, a human being doing a behavior is any action that the human being can do. And you're going to be more likely to do it if you were even remotely positively encouraged to do it.
Yeah.
So the theory would be you have X behavior that you would want to teach the person to do, and you have Y reinforcement that is positive that increases the likelihood that that X behavior will happen the next time when you're given the antecedent or the cue to engage in the behavior. So we're both sitting right here. The chair is actually our cue, and our conversation is part of the prompt. And we're sitting here, and I'm pretty comfortable, and it seems like you are as well. And so we're still doing it, right? Yeah. And the next time we come in this room, we'll probably still sit in these chairs because A, they're here, and B, they're pretty comfortable. So that's positive reinforcement. I'm enjoying our conversation, so that's positive reinforcement. I'd like to, A, continue, and B, potentially do it again sometime, right? So that's positive. The downside of behavior services can be that it can be transactional instead of connection or relational. And transactional behaviors are limited. They're just limited. And so we have plenty of things that we do in life that are transactional, but kids don't learn in a transactional way. Kids learn in a relationship way and a connection way. And that is true even if you're an autistic kid. You might need those connections to be spotlighted slightly differently or set up in a way that benefits your regulatory system, your sensory system, your communication style. But you can still do it via connection. Yeah. And you're probably you're going to be able to everybody can do transactional behaviors, right? We can all teach them walk in the door, take off your shoes, walk in the door, take off your shoes. We can teach that to anybody. And what do we really want them to know is we don't want mud inside the house. And there's this bigger picture to it, right? So I don't have, I was an ABA therapist, again, 35 years ago now, when I was in college. I was a line therapist before ABA was really kind of a thing. And certainly work with many good BCBAs, and there's lots of folks out there that provide a lot of great instruction and training. And to a person, I would say that the families that have accessed that have found benefit in some aspects of it. And they have also listened to their gut and their heart and kind of done it with balance, right? And so for me, what I have probably about 10 years ago, there was a book called Self-Reg and some work from Dr. Stuart Shanker that I can recommend. Mm-hmm. And that was illuminating to me, and it still drives a lot of what I think about today when I'm interacting with people. And that is the idea of regulation, and the idea that any of us, if we're feeling dysregulated for any reason whatsoever, we're not going to be able to be in a learning space. We're not going to be able to we need to feel safe, and we need to feel regulated in our body in order for our minds to be able to take in new information of any sort, whether that be communication, relationship information, math, and driver's ed. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, if we're not feeling it, it's going to be real hard for us to pay attention. And so thinking in terms of how you help your child feel regulated, how you yourself are regulated as a parent. If it's really dysregulating to you that your child's not talking, that's something to think about and work on, because it's probably going to create some anxiety and stress between you and your child. And that's okay. It's fair for you to feel nervous about that. And feeling dysregulated is going to make it hard for you to move on too. Yeah. Just like with a child.
Because I think that the important piece here is you want the best for your child. And it's just seeking what option really is the best possible solution for your specific child.
Mm-hmm. But to a person, I would say helping them feel safe and secure and regulated in their own skin will not be a waste of time.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Right? It will be a good focus for whomever to be thinking about, the sound. Okay, so I don't know if that's bothering you at all, but there's a bug in here.
Yeah.
Have you noticed this?
Okay. I have, but
okay.
I let it go.
I've let it go as well, but it's kind of bugging me.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's annoying to me, and it's like doing a good job of it right now, being a bug. And if that was something where I had hearing sensitivity and I was basically feeling threatened because I could hear that and I couldn't sort of turn on that part of my brain that says it's okay, we can ignore it. If I was having that, this conversation would have been over 20 minutes ago. I wouldn't have been able to feel good and safe because I would have been focused on that. And if we think about any kids with some sort of sensory sensitivity, that could be their whole time at school. That could be, I had somebody who lived on the airplane, the line of the flight path, and was hypersensitive to airplanes, and so I don't know, 10 times an hour was feeling dysregulated, and their whole family had to work on how to help him feel regulated because he lives right there, and they finally ended up moving, which was great, but not everybody can do that, and so it's how do we can't expect him to be doing math homework and to figure out how to do the dishes and walk the dog and be a responsible neighbor and all of those kinds of things when every 10 minutes he's absolutely out of his skin because there's a plane overhead. That's dysregulating, and that's really difficult. And so to come back to your original question about what parents can focus on, my sense is to think in terms of certainly intervention. I'm a huge fan of relationship-based intervention because I do think it helps the parent as well. So anything that parents can get coaching on, and then regulation, just understanding that you're a small human needs help to feel comfortable and safe in order to be able to move on. And we all do, but it's just sort of more obvious sometimes with our littler ones.
And I would imagine it's extremely important for active involvement by the parents.
It certainly can be, done with a team of folks, but it's really about caring individuals. It's just like any of the research that would, talk about, maybe foster care or orphanage. We don't really have orphanages anymore, but like any kind of non-custodial, biological parent caring for someone. It's less about it being a certain thing and more about consistent caring. There's a word that's blowing out of my mind right now, but responsive, that's the word.
Okay.
Responsive, so, people who are attuned, that adult caregiver provides the child with the environment that they need. Now, what the child is bringing to it might be a dysregulated sensory system, and so the parent might need to do a little bit slightly different dance than they normally would with their parenting, but they're not coming into it, necessarily needing special skills other than be there, right?
Yeah.
There's Dan Siegel is a psychologist, really wonderful, and he talks about the power of showing up. Yeah, and so that whole idea of how do we help the person be ready, but how do we help the guide, just keep being there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an enormous oversimplification, but yeah.
But the enormous oversimplification helps me give a frame of reference that I didn't have before. But something else that I talk to parents about all the time is parallel play.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such a foreign concept to people. And a lot of people just don't understand that if you have parallel play, that's still play, that's still involvement. Can you sort of talk to them about what parallel play is?
Yeah, absolutely. So parallel play is totally developmentally appropriate and extremely common. Many, many, many humans basically start with parallel play for the first couple of 2 or 3 years. That's pretty common. And sometimes our autistic folks feel comfortable there and they stay there a little bit longer. But I would also argue that you can circle back to that in adulthood and have some parallel play if you think in terms of my partner likes to ride his motorcycle with his buddies, and here they are doing their thing, but they're going out for a long motorcycle bike ride. They're not playing a game. They're not back and forth or whatever. They're 3 or 4 of them on their motorcycle doing their own thing, but in parallel with one another, and they're enjoying and they're connecting and they're doing this thing that they enjoy, that they like, but it's not got the same kind of obvious pressure of a back and forth. So if you're a person, a small child, who's maybe not totally understanding the verbal communication. Maybe the nonverbal communication is a little fuzzy for you. Maybe imaginative play is not quite something that you've picked up on just yet. Now you add in, oh, I really like the color blue, and you're not wearing blue, so now I'm really not sure what I think about you. But you have a train and I have a train, so I'm going to be real happy to sit near you while I do my thing with the train and you do your thing with the train, and maybe our trains bump into one another, and that's okay. That's totally okay. I think that it's really what's tricky is that the nuances of socialization is an enormous net that's cast, right?
Yeah.
And we have a deficits model of how we look at some of these things, and I don't know that it's always a deficit to be in parallel play. Maybe you're actually doing exactly what you need to feel really regulated and feel happy and feel like you can be in that room with all those people if you're doing something that's the same but not with them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that it could be great. I was a swimmer, so I did a lot of my own thing in my own lane along with everybody else.
The only sport I could do as a child was cross country.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize it was for that parallel play purpose until way later in life. Because I was not going to be like in an actual team competitive sports. I couldn't navigate those waters. But I could run by myself. Yeah. So that was an easy way to participate.
Mm-hmm. And you can run by yourself with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and enjoy it. And they would, and you still get the benefit of the physical benefit, the emotional benefit of the goal setting and all of those kinds of things. The team benefit, the camaraderie, all of that is still there. And no one is gonna be thinking twice about parallel play being weird. It would be actually really weird if it was somehow like a combative cross country.
Oh, that would be wild. And then the other thing that I want to sort of talk a little bit about is this concept of tantrums.
Mm.
And the reason being is because when I talk to people that don't have experience with autism, and I try to explain what an autism tantrum is compared to what a child who's not autistic is, it's not always necessarily a behavioral tantrum. It could actually be like sensory overload or a myriad of other factors. Mm-hmm. Can you sort of help talk about the difference between that?
Yeah. In fact, there's been more talk lately about shifting away from the word tantrum and thinking more about meltdown. So if we have the visual of like kind of nuclear meltdown, which is pretty dramatic and it's not nuclear, but just the whole idea of I'm overwhelmed and now I'm melting down.
Yeah.
Versus I want my way and I'm gonna, pitch a fit, as my mother would say, until I get my way. So kind of the language can be helpful to sort of try and distinguish those two things, right?
It helps a lot. Yeah.
Meltdown versus tantrum. Again, oversimplification. Tantrum would be, may I have a piece of candy? No, you may not. I want a piece of candy. I want what I want when I want it and I want it now. Versus, I want a piece of candy. I'm sorry, you can't have a piece of candy. Oh, I'm feeling like I will never have candy ever again. I'm feeling totally not heard. I've had this really long day and I was looking, and these all would maybe be thoughts and not something that the person could express. I was looking forward to this piece of candy all day. This person does not understand me and my shoe is really tight and I really have to go to the bathroom and I didn't sleep last night and I am losing it. Same exact scenario, but what this person is experiencing are two totally different things.
Oh, I like that distinction. And it's like, for me, it's interesting because like when I get to sensory overload, it almost feels like there's a pressure in my brain. And as I get closer to sensory overload or meltdown, I realize that I start to lose other senses because my brain just does not have the capacity. And I can't exist on a normal plane with all 5 of my senses going on at once. Mm-hmm. I always turn one off. So like scent is usually the one that goes.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you're in a mall and you're walking by Bed Bath and Beyond or Bath and Body Works, and all of a sudden it's too much smell for you to have that turned off, I gotta escape.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta get to somewhere where I can regulate myself, where I can get away from the smells, or find some other thing I can turn off just so I can exist for that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea or that pull is there. And I don't know if there's anything you can do about that other than just time and getting away from the stimulus.
Yeah, certainly time and getting away from the stimulus. And then the other piece of it would be if there would be, in theory, if you really felt like, I don't know, your goal in life would be to work in the mall next to Bed Bath and Beyond. So you needed to overcome this for some reason. Then there would be potentially just some practice and like desensitization kind of things where you would start to slowly turn on all five senses in small ways and maybe build some stamina potentially.
Yeah.
That, in theory, that would be something, a lane for what you're describing. I think for when it comes to like sensory overload, I think we can also like lump in for when it comes to tantrums versus meltdowns with kids.
Yeah.
You can also just think about emotional overload as well, because what I think that so often, especially like ADD or anxiety, are so co-occurring and kind of intertwined with an autistic mind, right? And so what we have to kind of recognize is that in our, the piece of candy example, I was pulling things out from last week that are overwhelming me, but those are real and those are big in that little person's mind, and that disappointment, sort of cut to the core. And so being able to, it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning about helping parents understand their child's regulation, is how do you help the parent recognize the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown, and then help the child be more resilient, or be ready for like, not necessarily saying no in that moment and saying like, okay, how can I help this person have a little bit of something so they're not dysregulated, or maybe you would say, this is dysregulation we're just going to have to get through today, and that's okay too. But my point is just that like being able to first recognize the differences, and then also recognizing in yourself your own regulation, because it's the whole concept of putting on your mask first. It's extremely important that people recognize their own anxieties and worries and regulation themselves before they are intervening with someone else.
And I do want to throw this out there for people listening. If you're in the community and you see something like a child having a tantrum or something like that in the store, let the parents handle it. Don't get involved. Don't be a Karen. Don't get up and just let it go and let them do the best that they can, because they don't have the bandwidth to put up with you and their child at the same time. Let them focus on their child and help them get through whatever situation that they are, and then just be supportive in any way you can. I just want to throw that out there because I think it's very important.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, you're reminding me that I wanted to say, I feel like tantrum is sort of like a 70s and 80s, a 60s and 70s word or something. Yeah. It's I think of, there's sort of, my mom is in her 80s, like, oh, that child is not behaving, and I just, she's doing great. Actually, she's learned a lot, but just the concept of learning, like, yeah, but we don't know anything about what's going on for that child or that family.
Yeah,
we don't know anything about how long that day has been. We don't know anything about their circumstances, and so I agree with you. Letting that parent handle it, or and certainly if the person is, you could help get the cart out of the way, or there are things you can do to be helpful, and there's plenty that you can do to just move along and, mind, what is that, MYOB? Mind your own business. Mind your own business.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I agree.
And it's because especially like that feeds into the conversation I have time and time again about being curious over judgmental. Mm-hmm. Because like you said, you don't know the family dynamic. You know, and I always like to tell people that not even identical twins have the same exact stories. So you don't know anything about all of that stuff. Just because you met one twin doesn't mean you've met the other. And I think that's a very important piece. Um, and sometimes, especially in situations where your child's on the spectrum, it can take a village to raise us. And it's a collaborative effort from the entire family. Um, and one of the things that I see that's a struggle for families is that idea of acceptance in the community and like how to sort of handle those waters because there's a lot of stereotypes, there's a lot of misconceptions about what that looks like and what it is. And so I really appreciate that idea of being curious and like not knowing anything about the family because like I tell people all the time like we're all one medical concern away from being in poverty. You know, it's one of those realities that's just life. And so anytime you can be kind to people, anytime you can support somebody and help them, I say do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge.
It's enormous and so needed, so needed.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that, and I'm pretty sure they still exist, but the Autism Society of Oregon has these little kind of business cards.
Yep.
Have you seen these?
Yep.
Yeah. Have you talked about them before?
No.
Oh, okay. Just for your audience to know that they say, you know, I'm this person is experiencing. I'm supporting an autistic person, and so you know, this might not look like you expect it to, but I'm handling it, or I'm the parent, I'm the caregiver of this person, and it'll be fine. And they're meant to hand out during sort of tense situations, or when you need to focus on something else. And someone comes up and is not minding their own business, you can hand them a business card and carry on about your day, focusing on the person who needs your support in order to regulate, in order to experience the mall or the grocery store or the car wash or wherever you are. And that person gets a little more information.
Yeah.
And maybe a little understanding.
Yeah.
And they're just available from the Autism Society of Oregon.
And that's how you and I met.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, because I'm on the board of the Autism Society of Oregon. And the reason I'm on the board is because of things like that. Because they do things that other organizations and entities don't really do. Like I was on the board for the Washington Society, the Autism Society of Washington, and they're not really active. It's like a core group of people that try to do like small things, but then you come to Oregon, and the Autism Society of Oregon is doing such a good job that they've actually providing support to a whole group of people who live in Washington, which is kind of unheard of. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I support the organization is because sometimes it's good to be around other people who are not only on the spectrum, but also parents, getting around other parents. Like, how important is that to sort of have that sense of community for people?
You know, I'm not a parent of an autistic person, so I can't speak from personal experience, but it's been reported to me that it's invaluable. That having community, and I think we can all agree that community for all of us is really helpful. And so this type of community, some people who also understand and get it, that this parenting journey is extremely difficult and is not going to be linear, and you know, can be really scary at times, can be really expensive at times, which is also scary, might be feeling really, really lonely a lot of the time. I think we could take some of those descriptors and place them on many groups of people.
100%.
And, you know, the autistic individuals and the children themselves, you know, autistic adults. That being said, community starts to, and being in support with other parents starts to chip away at some of that loneliness, some of the, you know, understanding that you have other resources available to you, or, you know, just hearing, I know there's like various online groups and things of that nature that, you know, maybe they share a DSP, or I had a family who, what were they using? They were I think I took it to 4 different people. So a parent had it, and they were like, "Oh, do you know someone who can use this spinner?" So it was like a handmade sit and spin. It was about this size. It was carpeted, and it was fun. And so I took it to that family, and they were like, "Nah, they don't like it." And so I was like, okay, I'll pick it back up. Took it to another person, and they're like, no, I don't like it. And I was like, okay. Took it to the third one. It found a home. So, but here's this very small way in which just this, it was a piece of plywood on a spinner and an old piece of carpet that some family created, and now it's got a new life for families across town, because people were willing to share and be open.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the last thing I want to talk about today, because it's a very important piece, is eloping.
Mm.
Um, it's one of the scariest. Like, I've seen it on more than a dozen occasions. And something I always encourage parents to, if they have a child that's starting those things, is get them swimming lessons. Because that's like the number one cause of death right now amongst kids on the autism spectrum, is drowning.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about why that concept of like eloping is, or sort of like the psychology behind it? Because it's one of those things that I never quite understood.
Yeah. It again, very general. It's usually either I need to get out of here. Again, back to our bug example. That bug's bugging me so much that I'm going to escape and get away, as far away from it as possible. Or it is, I really want to go towards something. I saw that there was an ice cream store. I was told I couldn't have it, but I remember where it is, and the door is right there. I'm going to run, and I'm going to find that ice cream store because I really want ice cream. And often, those are the two extremes. This is an area where I do recommend a lot of safety measures, things like door chimes on doors, and informing all of your neighbors, whether you're friends with them or not. Just say, hey, this person, this is what they look like. Have pictures of everybody so everybody understands. Going to your local emergency services, so going to your local police station, going to your local fire station, and saying, this is a picture. This is introducing them, because you want your child to understand that those people are safe, and that they could run to them and not away from them. Making sure that there's locked fences, for sure, understanding if there's any pools in your neighborhood or other bodies of water, especially if they're open bodies of water without a fence. Oh my goodness, yeah. Let's work on getting that fenced if you can. I agree with you 100%. Swimming lessons, and I will just give a little plug for that when it comes to swimming, believe it or not, the thing that we want that child to be able to do is float on their back, because if you can get on your back, you can breathe. So as much as possible, help them be comfortable on their back with their ears in the water, and their mouth will be out of the water.
Okay.
It's an extreme simplification, but that would be the focus. They're going to not like it necessarily. People don't love to have their ears under the water, but keep working on it, because they'll get there.
That's awesome. I appreciate that.
I have two more things for elopement. It would be identification. So, there's wristbands, there's things that go on shoes, there's the tags on clothes, there's all kinds of things that you can get that say person's name. If you don't want the full name, that's okay. You could, whatever kind of identifying information. I would be much more worried if your child is an eloper. I would be significantly more worried about danger from cars or from ending up just being highly misunderstood than I would about somebody nefarious taking them and knowing their name. I feel less confident that someone would take them, so to speak, kidnapping wise, and much more concerned about ending up in a body of water, or ending up running across a big street or something like that. And then last but not least, some version of extremely overt practice. Two things. One would be actually showing people the wrist, that identification, right? So if somebody says, hey, who are you? That they can show the person, that they can hold out their wrist and have their name be on there. If they can't verbally say, oh, I'm Pam, that if it's on my wrist, that I hold it out to people when they ask.
Okay.
Right? So there's that action. And then if at all possible, to teach the person to respond to their name. And that can be, or a where are you type of these are very overt cues. So this isn't a space where behavioral training can be, rigid. And this is like
100%.
going to the bathroom or like
Yeah.
something that's like stopping at red lights. It's too important and too safety minded to you can be a little more rigid around that one. Whereas, so if I were to say, Shawn, where are you? I'd want you to be trained to have some kind of sound or something back to me or come to where that voice is. And that would be a standard. These are all ways to try and get in front of that problem.
Yeah. I could see that being a huge thing, like especially like in a park, if they're hiding like in the woods or they're hiding in a spot and they don't know to come. Yeah, I can see that.
So making it a game, making it fun. That goes back to your positive reinforcement question. Like,
Yeah.
You would have, Shawn, where are you? Be equated with, I bought cookies.
Yeah. Okay.
And then guess what? You're probably more likely to be like, I'm right here, coming for the cookies. And that it's not going to solve everything. None of
Right.
those things is going to solve everything. Locking doors, all of these things. None of it. There's a ton of electronic tools that are out there. And so if you really have somebody who's on the move, explore all of those options and take every single one of them.
And GPS watches are a must if they can stand them to be on their wrist.
Or tags, or there's tags for shoes.
Okay.
Oh, I had a guy, he had a belt and he had a tracker on his belt and they called it his superhero belt. So it made it so he would want to wear it. Oh, look, you're being a superhero. Oh, I need my superhero belt. And he was super excited to wear it because he was being a superhero.
And the last thing I'll say is I want to piggyback on what you're talking about with law enforcement and the fire department. Because if you're an adult on the spectrum, I've done it. I introduce myself to law enforcement. I introduce myself to the fire department and let them know that I'm autistic, give them your address, let them know what your triggers are so that it's in the computer so that when law enforcement rolls up, they look at those notes. They get an idea of because they want to know what they're getting into. And so if it's on the records that saying you're autistic and these are some of the things, they will turn off their sirens a mile before they get to your house. They will make sure they're not rolling in with their lights flashing in your eyes and things like that. There are things that they will do. So I would say if you're an adult, a parent, anybody with somebody who's on the autism spectrum, reach out to your local fire department, police department, and let them know you exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Well, it's been an hour, Pam.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for
how
having
can people
me.
get a hold of you? You do such an amazing work. If they have kids and they need your professional help.
Oh, thank you. You can find me at pjsconsultation.com.
pjsconsultation.com.
Those are my initials, or PJs, like
I love that.
warm and cozy in your jammies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
One last thing. Before I forget, I wanted to give you a kindness coin.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for everything that you've done and all of the things that you do. When you see or hear a medical professional that takes care in their clients, and I know too many people who are on the autism spectrum who have a very bad relationship with their medical providers. So anytime I have a medical provider who is so highly recommended, who goes out of their way to be kind to the families of people who have autism, I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you. I appreciate it.